together for an organization, and they work really well together. There's also a lot of complications to that because they're coming from such opposite sides of the field.
Yeah.
But when you can find a way to work together, establish trust, and move forward together, it really is an incredible relationship.
Hey, you're listening to the Follower of One podcast. We want our faith to matter full time, whatever we're doing, but especially at work. Here's today's podcast. And it's Mike Henry Sr. with Follower of One. Thanks for joining me again today on the Follower of One podcast. Today, my guest is Garry Miles. Garry, would you tell everyone hi?
Hey, he's correct. That is my name, and I am very happy to be here. I really appreciate knowing Mike and everything that's happened between us since then.
Yeah. So, Garry, tell everybody a little bit about the type of work that you do.
So from a most identifiable label, I would, for many, call it a fractional COO. If you get a little bit more specific into the world of operating systems and different things like that that I run in, it would be specifically called an integrator. But basically, I'm working with visionaries, business owners, CEOs, and coming alongside them, helping them with operational aspects, often the culture inside of a business, kind of trying to fill out those gifts and skill sets that are missing from a visionary or business owner that I don't necessarily bring to the table, but we're working together to get from point A to point B, from what is the vision to this is the vision to, okay, let's execute the vision.
Yeah. So basically, you step in as like the chief operations officer or someone who's helping the leader of an organization.
Yes,
For
absolutely.
for our listeners who are familiar with it, this is based on some of the teachings of Gino Wickman and the whole traction book and process, correct?
Yes, that is. And it's a lot of principles that have been around for a long time. In fact, I think somebody told me the other day they're keeping track. It's just kind of a pet project. There's about 42 different operating systems using these principles now,
Wow.
but EOS does a really great job of simplifying it. But there's also some other really great approaches to this.
And EOS is the entrepreneurial operating system, right?
Correct.
And it's based on the book Traction. I got connected with this. I read the book Traction quite a few years back, but I
Mhm.
recently read the book Rocket Fuel, which is the one that really focuses on the idea of integrators. The integrator idea was introduced in the first book, but it was really fleshed out in Rocket Fuel, correct?
Yeah, it was. And I for me, really that's where it lit up for me. They call it rocket fuel because there is the potential for rocket fuel when these two types of personalities and skill sets get together for an organization and they work really well together. There's also a lot of complications to
Mhm.
that because they're coming from such opposite sides of the field.
Yeah.
But when you can find a way to work together, establish trust, and move forward together, it really is an incredible relationship.
Okay, so I want to just step back in time a little bit and ask you a little bit about you.
Mhm,
So, how did you come to this kind of an idea of a job? And
mhm.
also, how does your faith kind of mix in with that?
Yeah, it's always nice when you can look back and see what God was doing, how he was preparing you. But I came from a very Christian, very ministry focused background. I'm thankful for a lot of that experience that I was able to have. But 12 years really is what we're looking at, full-time vocational ministry. That's how I was spending my time before that. And I think it's somewhat personal, it's somewhat career oriented, the way that I came to this. I've got a family. I've been married for 14 years, 4 children, and I actually attribute a lot of what has taken place in me and what's guided me a certain direction. I give a lot of the credit to just having a family. I
Hmm.
think this isn't the only type of invitation along these lines that God extends, but it was a vital opportunity for me to be able to start working on separating the correct and incorrect implementations of my gifts and personality. And perhaps the single greatest experience God used to open my mind to what's possible in business, actually. All the different, just within your family, different giftings, personalities, approaches, perspectives, weaknesses. And I feel like in the midst of that, you have a choice, right? There's kind of two general paths. I can filter everything through mostly my own perspective by seeking to dominate and correct everyone else where they disagree with me. Or I can sit within the reality that we're all as different as we are by God's design. And
Hmm.
maybe he wants everyone who's a part of that community to play a part in adding to the solutions and direction we go. And that's sort of a little bit of a foreshadowing of some of the beauty that I saw uh, in business and related to even like what I think Christ represents in the church.
So you were on staff at a church, right? Or in a ministry? Was it a church?
I've been an outside of the box thinker for a long time, and that sort of led me into a lot of different aspects. So first and second command roles in church, existing churches, church plants, in Bible college ministries, Bible colleges, and then even just started a few. One of the more fun ones that I was a part of was a drama troupe that traveled the whole country and did these sort of interactive, impromptu presentations with different ministries. We went and did things in prisons, youth groups,
Wow.
churches, conferences. So that's some of the weirder stuff that I got into, but it was a blast. I loved it.
Well, so how did you end up outside of vocational ministry types of roles and in this entrepreneurial role?
I feel like, strangely, I can pinpoint the point at which that started to happen and what led to that. And if there's too much of this, we can always just get rid of this later. But a big part of it for me was sort of this crossroads in my faith. I had grown up in a Christian family. My family's like 12 generations back over in Europe. We're pastors. So it's just like ingrained in us. And sometimes when you grow up around that, the line is sort of blurred between what is you and what your environment is.
Huh?
And there came a point later when we actually moved to be part of a church plant where we hit some hard times and God stripped away about as much as not everything, but almost everything that we were sort of leaning on, relying on in our lives. And it was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in one sense, but in another sense, it wasn't. I remember getting to a point where I considered my faith and I simply thought, if this is all there is to faith, it's not enough. Like,
Hmm.
this isn't going to carry me. And, you know, call it the grace of God, which I think it was. And just the way and the way he led and things played out, I stuck around with him to see. And
Yeah.
what that looked like immediately was a wrestling match between me and him that I said, I'm not going to leave. It's a little hearkening to a story we're all familiar with, but I'm not
Hmm.
leaving until he shows me something. And in the midst of that, I walked away, one, with a peace that I'd never experienced before in the midst of something like that. And secondly, a new realization of what my relationship, on a personal level could actually look like with Christ. And that growing relationship led to an ability, I guess I would say, to let go of my desire to conform to an earthly leader's worldview and look
Hmm.
for the ways he created me to impact the world. And that's sort of once I started thinking about that and having those kind of conversations with God, that began pushing me in sort of this unique direction that no one else that I knew in my community was really walking towards.
Well, that's very interesting. So through that process, then you ended up, would you just start consulting with some entrepreneurs to help them with their business? And
Yeah, that's it is a really weird leap. And what really kind of gave me the push is I've always wanted to, I don't know how to word this in not a weird way, but I've I was always felt like I wasn't supposed to be in sort of and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but in sort of a Christian bubble where most of the people I
Mhm.
knew were people who thought like me and were
Yeah.
people of faith. I wanted to be somewhere having conversations and helping, loving others who came from completely different places than I did. And at some point, I like looked out into the world and saw business. And it was
Hmm.
like, wow, look at there's like the last frontier of a place where people with different backgrounds and beliefs and perspectives will come together under one roof. And
Yeah.
there's a uniting purpose there. And from that point forward, it was sort of got inching me towards that. And I eventually over the line because there's just, I don't know, there's a whole God was just pushing me that direction. The last thing I did before I left the ministry was I actually approached the ministry I was working for with the idea of a fractional integrator. Well, not a fractional integrator, excuse me. I approached them with the idea of a integrator. I didn't know that. And they
Hmm.
were like, we don't really know what you're talking about. And it
Yeah.
wasn't a mean no, but like, no, let's, there wasn't interest in it. And then when I crossed over out of ministry into the business world, that's when I immediately, ran smack dab into rocket fuel. And it was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is exactly what so God had been like leading me towards my skill set. And
Uh-huh.
so that was really cool. And so from there, joined their university, was trained, and then began just working with that focus in different organizations.
Yeah. And what I want you to know too, listeners, you can connect with Gary. We're going to put links to his LinkedIn profile on here. He does a lot of work with you do a lot of work now with entrepreneurs, different people who are more visionary about their business. And
Mhm.
this is all based on this relationship between having a visionary that's in charge of a business and trying to get things done. But visionaries don't typically have the skills necessary to execute things and follow through on a lot of all those things at the same time. And so that's where the integrator comes in. They're the person who kind of makes the rest of that happen, correct?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
And so I stumbled across this very thing because of what we've been going through with follower of one. I do a lot of the things in our ministry. We also have a team of people who help us with many of the things that we do in this ministry, and they're all great people. But I don't understand why everybody doesn't just see what I see and go do it,
I've
right?
never had that conversation before. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people go, I don't know what you're talking about. I want to help. They want to do the right thing. And I
Mhm.
don't even want to be correcting people all the time, but I just don't realize what I don't say.
Mhm.
And so it becomes a challenge. I'm sure the my teammates who help me are challenged and stressed by this a lot of times. I have to be very careful to maintain and be patient and not get uh, irritable about this because clearly I'm not communicating well. It's my problem because
Mhm.
I'm the one who knows what I'm trying to accomplish. And so having someone who's helping me communicate those things and helping people follow through on them,
Yeah.
that's a beneficial role. And that's why the book Rocket Fuel appealed to me as well.
Yeah, no, and you worded it very well, and it's one of those situations, there's a point at which I suppose we're all trying to do it on our own, and I think even some have sort of a more balanced skill set where they can kind of jump back and forth between those two roles. Still really hard to play them both, but when you can just get to a point where it's like, you know what, I'm not good at that. I should just put somebody else in between me and the rest of the organization who is good at that. And then I don't
Mhm.
have to be sweating about that all the time and the miscommunication and so yeah, it's one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is focused on that. I guess I would call it operational aspect. How do we make the operational aspect of the business efficient, among other things?
Well, when I started Follower of One, because it's actually the second group type of online community thing that I have done in my
Mhm.
career. when
Yeah.
I started it, a friend who was in the first one asked me, he said, "Well, are you going to be the visionary time or are you going to be the operator?" And and he said every organization needs four roles, and he named all four of them, but two of them were the visionary and the operator. And he said, if you're going to be the operator, you need to go find someone with a vision and
Mhm.
submit to that. And if you're going to be the visionary, then you need to make someone else become the operator so that the vision job gets done.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I feel like this is a vision that I'm supposed to execute on. And he
Yeah.
said, well, then be a good visionary.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning how to do that. He didn't give me a lot of advice for how to do that. But then
Yeah.
when I read the book, Rocket Fuel, it really clicked for me as well. And I think, there are many more of us who dream these ideas and then go try and make them happen. And
Mhm.
the real commodity are these people who are integrators. So tell me a little bit more about the skill of an integrator. What I'd love to do is to challenge people who might be looking for this kind of role to follow up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So there, this is kind of, you and I have probably talked about multiple aspects of this. I really love exploring, learning, just it will really in the psychology of anything, but really this as well. I'm fascinated by it. Someone just released a book. Nathan Young and David Hartman, they released a book called How to Be Second, and in it they zoom in on the integrator and they actually identify and they've talked to tons of integrators and gotten their insights and input on this as they were writing this book. But they zoom in on it and really show there's this spectrum, what they call kind of a second in command spectrum, that there are those that approach this type of work,
Mhm,
the integrator type of work, either from a systems and processes foot forward or relationships foot forward. So one
mhm,
type of integrator might come in and establish very quickly all of the systems and processes and structure needed. And then after creating that support for everyone, will then sort of kind of mix that with the relationships and the people in the organization. Whereas myself, more on the other end of the spectrum, I'm going to come in. Relationships are very important to me. Not that they're not important to the other, it's just what I lead with. I'm going to get to know people and sort of walk them into those systems
mhm,
and processes. So there are some differences out there between those, but really, so I guess one thing that might be good to highlight is really what you're looking for. Like most of the time, in general, when you're looking at EOS or an integrator, the conversation is going to settle, I would say, on this. What can you do for me operationally?
mhm,
And the integrator is going to say, well, I can be your go-between. I can help you filter your ideas so that we're not changing our direction all the time. I can set up the systems and process and tools that we need to be efficient. I can be your thought partner. I can do all these things for you. And then beyond that point, you're sort of looking at, okay, well, what is it? How do I choose what integrator do I pick? What type of integrator do I want to come into my business and perform those things for me? Well, at that point, that's probably one of the ways in which I would say I I would say I sort of break off a little bit from the mold of
mhm.
that role. And that's where what I'm doing as an integrator really mixes with my calling. The reason I feel like God has brought me over into
Mhm.
this space.
And to go ahead, expound a little more. So, how does your faith and your relationship with God impacting this particular skill and this responsibility that you do?
Well, that's my favorite thing to talk about in relation to this, so I guess I will answer your question. But gladly, gladly. After having done what I do fractionally for a while, so there are full-time integrators out there. There's fractional, they're part-time. So I, in a sense, repeat this EOS or operating system life cycle over and over again with the goal of getting a full-time individual into that seat. And there's certain things I've seen crop up as inevitable obstacles. And I think those are of a concern too. But one of the things people tell me, hey, often, how can I help you? How can I connect you? What would you ask of me in that sense? And I always say, it's a little bit more vague, but a place to start with people is I would love to have a conversation with anyone who's, business owner, visionary along those lines, who desires to do more with their business than simply scale or make a profit with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's so important to me is, one, I care about people. I really don't want to leave people behind in this process,
Mm-hmm.
but also I really see an incredible opportunity in the world of business and in the idea of operating systems with some effort and the right gifts and skills in place. We have the ability to create this ecosystem where people
Mm-hmm.
spend a large chunk of their life, and we can create cultures where people are thriving and feeling fulfilled and getting what they need,
Yeah.
even beyond just a job. And then we can take that even further, involve into these organizations that are impacting our communities. And one of the things that I really try to speak to is there's visionaries out there, right? And they just have this incredible skill set that I just cannot drum up the way they do. They have the ability to build like nothing else, like no one else. They can turn an idea into, like I said, this ecosystem where all these people are revolving around it. They're earning a living from it. It's a community. And this is sort of where it interacts with my calling. When I started thinking about that, I started thinking about, wow, what an incredible opportunity to view that in a sense the way we view the church. Here's
Mm-hmm.
this community. I feel like in our society, it depends on what we've been exposed to, who we've had conversations with, but I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, modern expectations of society and the church sort of leave them with, yeah, go build that thing, be successful, do it in a way that honors and glorifies God. And then, society would say, yeah, do some good, but as far as the rest goes, you earn that.
Yeah.
Do whatever you
Yeah.
want with it. The church might say, yeah, let God bless you. Just make sure that you are giving to this cause and this cause. And I don't personally think, and God might lead some that way, and I think that's great, and I think that that's fantastic. But I also think that it's already on the hearts of some visionaries and business owners and business leaders to use their ability to build to do so much more beyond that
Yeah.
for God in regards to their faith. I don't know if I'm sure there's many on here who are familiar with the faith-driven entrepreneur ministry. And one of the things, if you're exposed at all, that you'll get to see is all the incredible ways that God is showing people how to take care of others and make more of a difference than just, and this is still good. We want to represent Christ with our businesses and things, but also I think God wants us to build our businesses from the ground up with him in mind and be creative and see how can we meet the needs of the people in our community, of the people that work for us, and show them real love and real sacrifice. And I think there's also a lot of visionaries and business owners out there who don't quite necessarily. Maybe there's a little bit of emptiness involved with building. They can build and they build over and over again. They can make a load of money, but maybe there's something missing.
Yeah. Well, I think you've touched on it there. We can, depending upon our aim, if we aim
Mhm.
low enough, then we we
Yeah.
get in the mire. If we
Hmm.
aim high enough, though, then we start looking for God's reason for doing the things that we do,
Yeah.
whatever that is. And when we
Yeah.
found God's reason for something, that
Hmm.
seems to be more compelling, at least to a Jesus follower, than
Yeah.
anyone else. And a lot of people bail on something less than God's reasoning. And many
Hmm.
people project that motive on the church. They
Yeah.
project that motive on Christians they don't know.
Hmm.
But in the end, we're all trying to strive to get to be more like Jesus. And
Hmm.
the closer we can get, he actually has an answer for everything that we do,
Yeah.
including building a business or anything else that we do. So I think
Yeah.
it's and I think it's great
Yeah.
that you sense that, right? That's part of what we want to do in Follower of One is help everyone realize that
Hmm.
just going to work, just
Yeah.
doing your job is still something that you can do for Jesus,
Yeah.
and it matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
I love I think it's Matthew 10:42. It's the last verse in that chapter. And he
Hmm.
says that, even if you give a cup of cold water because you're a disciple of Christ, you
Yeah.
shall not lose your reward.
Hmm.
And, to me, that means everything I do because I'm a Jesus follower matters. And so some of those things are big things. Some of those things aren't even church things. Some of the way I react to an email, I'm pointing at my other screen. So I reacted to an email that I got like 30 minutes ago before we start recording this, and it
Yeah.
was not nice. I didn't want that email. And so, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And uh, I think I think that's so true. And so yeah, there's ways if we can just I kind of I've sort of identified, and this isn't getting very specific because
yeah.
there's a lot of different ways you could categorize things, but I've sort of generalized four main obstacles that I see when I think about people having this type of impact with the people in
Mhm.
their business or in their community, or if they're a Christian for Christ. I would say there's sort of, yeah, four main obstacles I see. One of those, I think, is self-awareness. We get in our own way, and one of those is operational. We've talked a lot about
Mhm.
that. That one's pretty obvious. One of them's relational obstacles. What happens between us when we start trying to
Mhm.
work together. And then the last one, I sort of call imaginative. It ties into what we're talking about here, and that's just that I think we sort of let society and others determine what could happen and what's possible through a business and in a business. And I think, so part of what I'm seeking to bring is not only that operational answer, but also addressing and thinking about those other things that, especially if you're trying to build something that's this focused on good and the principles of Christ. I really think that you've got there's some stuff coming your way. There's some obstacles coming your way, especially if you want to do it in an inclusive, diverse way, because
Yeah.
that complicates things.
And so tell me the four again: self-awareness, relation.
Self-awareness, relational, operational, and imaginative.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a great point. I want to encourage everyone to connect with you about this. Also to check out the book Rocket Fuel. There's even an assessment that you can take in there to find
Hmm.
out if you're more the visionary or the integrator.
Yeah.
Uh, and we'll have links to both those things in the show notes. I want to encourage the listeners to connect with Garry. But before we go, too, I want to ask you. So,
Mhm.
in light of all this context, you and I actually met through an integrator, Christian integrators group. Tell me a little bit about what you thought when you got involved with the marketplace mission trip.
Absolutely. So that is how we met, and I went to one of those meetings, and there was Mike. I didn't know anything about Mike, and he started talking, and I got really excited. I mean, you get excited when somebody's addressing or talking about the space you're seeking to exist in and you're passionate about. And even before the call was over, we were sort of going back and forth a little bit about some of this, and it was fun. And so that's how I learned about the marketplace trip. And I haven't, and it's funny because I've told many people about it since then, and they always just get this weird look on their face because they don't, we're so bad at thinking outside the lines of what we're used to. So it's like, it's not in another country. And you don't like go anywhere. Like you're just at the place you were last week with the same role title, and that's kind of funny. But so then I got the opportunity from that conversation. I said, hey, I'd love to, if I don't know when the next one is, I'd love to jump on that. And he was like, well, there's one coming up here real soon. So I jumped on, and there were some, I was actually putting some real thought into this, the things that impacted me. And I think we're all at a different place and thinking even about different sort of levels of organization, even when we're coming at this. But I really appreciated my time, and I sort of answered four different questions when I was thinking about my time with the mission trip. And
Yeah.
one of them was, how did it help me? And I would, and I one word came to mind, and that was support. I think that that's one of the first things that I realized, is that this is a supportive community. And there's actually, depending on how much digging we've done in this world, there's not necessarily a lot of people that are surrounding you right now, that when you tell them you're going on a marketplace missions trip, that are going to be like, hey, that's awesome, man. How can we help? How can we support you? That's there in this community. So when you come in, it doesn't matter what's going on at your work or what specific type of thing you're coming up against. These people are just there, present, to find out how they can pray for you, give advice, talk through, experiences, and people who have been through things before. And so it just feels like you're supported when you're in there. So that was
Thanks.
one aspect that I really appreciated.
Very cool.
What difference did it make in me? I feel like for me, I had I'm coming at it from the approach of, this is something I really care about already, but for me, it added to the flame and motivated me to continue to pursue this calling. And so I think, maybe not everybody can relate to that so much, but I think at least we can relate to, if you're looking for a group of people to help you stay motivated and on fire to keep going that direction, it's a great place from that. And I thought, if someone asked me, well, what was just kind of your favorite aspect of being a part of that community and that trip, I would say, for me personally, just the uplifting camaraderie that was there. I mean, literally the very first meeting had people, I come from the perspective of, if you can't do something and laugh at the same time, not that we should make a joke out of everything, I get all that, but if you can't, if you're going to be in something with somebody, if you can't laugh, if you can't even poke fun at your own weaknesses or whatever it might be, and it's not a place of teasing or poking fun at other people. There was just great humor, people laughing together and having a good time doing it. And I think you need that
Yeah.
if you're going to stick out anything really personally. And I found that there, and it's a lot, honestly, like the community that I was in growing up. And so I'm sure that's part of it. But I think everybody, if they haven't been exposed to that type of community, they need to be. And so it was really neat for me to jump in there and immediately see, these people like each other. They
Mhm.
appreciate each other, and they're having a good time. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you taking the mission trip. This whole thing's been a fascinating blessing to me, just to see God do things with it in people's lives. And so
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm grateful for you doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks
Absolutely.
very much. Thanks for the plug. Thanks for being part of our community. Thank you for sharing this information with people today, too. I'm grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, I mean, I was thinking, because sometimes there's a lot of pressure with these kind of things. And then I remember today, oh, I'm just getting on there to talk with Mike. It's just gonna
Mhm.
be, it's just gonna be a good time. I've really appreciated our conversations. And so, yeah, I think we could easily do a long form of this, but that doesn't mean everybody's always asking for it.
I get it, but I think it's exciting. And so, if you'd like to learn more, I want to send you to Gary's LinkedIn profile. Look in the show notes, and we'll have the link. Connect with Gary, and step into your calling. Whatever God's bugging you about as you're listening to this podcast, go do it. I mean, the coolest thing to me about our faith is the fact that God's working out His plan. And even if we screw up, He had all that factored in. He knew what was going
Hmm.
on anyway.
Yeah.
And so He's, my mess ups have to be His problem.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do what he wanted. So I'm grateful
Yeah.
to you, Garry, for being on here. Grateful to the
Yeah.
listeners as
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate it. Anytime, anything. I know we'll be talking outside of this podcast. So
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks. And listeners, please do connect with Garry. Use his LinkedIn profile that's in the show notes. Or the other thing you can do is just go find this over on Follower of One's website, and you can find it linked there as well, or it'll also be on YouTube. So thank you for listening to the podcast. Thanks for sharing it. Remember, what we do because we follow Jesus matters forever. And so thank you very much. Follower of One is an online community of people who intentionally follow Jesus every day, at work or wherever we are. Join us at community.followerofone.org, and don't forget to subscribe and share it in your various social media channels. Thanks for listening.